Okay, so part 5, people are complicated. How King David's stories reveal that no single story captures our complex selves or gods. And we are rushing through this. We're already in 1 Samuel 18. The first 16 verses. So we had David and Goliath last week, and now we're moving into the pericope that follows. So I will read this text. This is from the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. And as I do, I just invite you to highlight, underline, note anything that grabs your attention and be ready to share that. When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. As a result, Saul set him over the army. And all the people, even the servants of Saul, approved. As they were coming home when David returned from killing the Philistine, the women came out of all the towns of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they made merry. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul was very angry, for this saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom?" So Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day, an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house. While David was playing the lyre as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of thousands. And David marched out and came in, leading the army. David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for it was he who marched out and came in leading them. Okay, let me start with you. What do you notice? What stands out to you?
I would just say Saul's bitterness for David's success.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty human, but you know, you can just see how that doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. Clearly a harbinger of more bad things to come.
Seems the previous relationship with David, being the soother and making him feel better. That memory is long gone.
Yeah. Because we've seen David in this role before, and it seemed to work. His music, it seemed to soothe him, but now Saul's just enraged.
It's dangerous to be a popular person against in comparison to a person who loves power.
Yeah, that's power and popularity clashing.
Chris, I can make a few comments. They're a little off base, I think, but first, I really like the concept of how Jonathan had bound his soul to David. I mean, I just love that idea and I just think it's a tremendous way to love. And so I'm really impressed by just that statement.
Yeah.
I do, you know, and it's unfortunate in some respects, and maybe it's just a reflection of strife or war or whatever it may be, where there's merriment in the killing of thousands and or 10,000s.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Interesting. Yeah.
why is that good? You know,
Mm.
and then of course then there's the jealousy, and so that really comes throughout the whole, you know, collection of verses.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good insight. I didn't think about that, but that's a harsh contrast there between the killing of people in war and the celebrating as the troops come back. Yeah. Anything else stand out to you?
I think David wasn't surprised by Saul's switch of attitude. You know, it strikes me, you know, if I was close to somebody and all of a sudden they're trying to kill me, that I'd be kind of in shock
Mm-hmm.
or disbelief. And I think being around the king, he probably saw a lot of mood swings and everything. So, I mean, being a ruler, it's a very precarious position to be in
Right.
because you're always watching your back because there's always somebody that wants to overthrow you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm not sure how these stories fit together in a linear timeline, you know, because
Mm.
it's a little messy there,
Mm-hmm.
but that's one reason I think why it seems so like whiplash, you know, to,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't seem like whiplash to the people around it, and when we were talking about that first paragraph, I was thinking, what do I say now that he loved him like a brother, and then you think about the brothers in all these stories don't have much love for each
Yeah,
other, you
yeah.
know, that might not have been a concept of,
Dangerous.
yeah, your
Yeah.
brothers were dangerous and competition and everything, so, you know, to say you loved him, you know, this is, so to try to express the kind of love that Jonathan had for David,
Mm-hmm.
you have to go outside of the familial
Yeah.
You know,
Right. Mhm.
ways of expressing it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Your brothers don't do very well from the very beginning.
No, they don't, they don't. It started off on the wrong foot.
Bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
goes
Yeah.
downhill. Yeah. And you know, the way it's described here, it's like everything went right for David and you know, nothing went right for Saul. I mean, you know, it's just like somebody flipped a switch. And
Yeah.
And everybody knows it. So the ladies
Yeah.
are singing about it,
yeah,
you know, so it's all out there.
yeah,
You know?
it's really a small village type of country, but
Mhm.
Yeah, but
you know,
still,
but yeah. But note the hyperbole. I'm
yeah.
not sure that there were thousands and tens of thousands dead
Right.
when he's only slaughtered, when he's only killed Goliath at this point, because he's out, you know. We went from bears and lions and bears to Goliath to 10,000s, you know, it's like, I think there's a little hyperbole there too, but,
Yeah.
um,
It does read like a story.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, but then the women could have just been making up a great song, you know, how they felt about it. It's like a poetic projection, you know,
Mhm.
that's how they feel about it. Saul didn't go down and kill Goliath,
Mhm.
so. But anyway,
Yeah, it's, and one commentator I read today was saying that it may have even been that the women were just using words that were more general, meaning, you know, David's killed a lot and Saul's killed a lot. That's so wonderful. But then Saul begins to hear that through his own jealousy
right,
and think, well, they're praising David because he did more than I did.
yeah,
So who knows what the, you know,
right.
what the details of that actual scene were like there. Some points of tension, some of which have already been raised here, but so page 18, number 1, a man who's bound to the soul of another man, a man who loved another man as his own soul. I mean, that as Art pointed out, that language is just not used a lot, and it's certainly not used a lot today. That's the kind of language we would think of between a man and a woman,
Mhm.
or maybe even between two women. But a man bounding his soul to another man is just a little
Yeah.
more intimate than we generally do masculinity in our own culture. Obviously, the contrast of Jonathan's love for David and Saul's anger at David, two people in the same family in two very different relationships with David. The people's love for David versus Saul's anger at David. The son of the king pledging loyalty to the rival king. We'll look at that in more detail here, but perhaps something we don't expect. And then once again, this mention of an evil or bad or harmful spirit sent from God to Saul just sort of runs contrary to the way that we might think God would work. There's an interesting structure in this particular text. So first 4 verses, David is loved by Jonathan. And then verse 5, he's set over the army. He's successful in everything he does. He's loved by all. And then David is hated by Saul. And then David is set over the army, successful in all that he does and loved by all. So clearly the major contrast there is the way that Jonathan and Saul relate to David. And then Jonathan giving to David articles that suggest royal authority, the robe, the armor, the sword, the bow, the belt, all of which would be a little unexpected here.
Do you think that's like him saying, I don't anticipate being the king following my father?
Yeah, that is one way of
Yeah.
reading that. Yeah, that
I give this up.
Right.
yeah, my path to the throne is now yours,
Mhm.
which it's a pretty big deal.
Mhm.
So let's talk about David and Jonathan, David and the people, and David and Saul. Okay. So first, David and Jonathan, a few quotes here from commentators. To seal the bond between them, Jonathan stripped off his robe and the rest of his apparel, even to his sword, to his bow, and to his girdle, and tenderly draped them on the handsome young man. Significantly, Saul had tried to do much the same thing for David only moments earlier. But David had rejected the offer of armor and weaponry from Jonathan's father. Now the gesture was accepted and fully reciprocated. What's more, it was not only his armor, but his more intimate garments too that Jonathan removed from his own body and placed upon David's. Such details have not escaped the attention of artists and writers over the centuries. A pious reading insists that the biblical text offers the classic description of genuine, unselfish love. A more worldly reading suggests that the covenant between David and Jonathan was not a love pact, but a political arrangement, by which Jonathan, son of the reigning king, pledged his loyalty to the man who would ultimately replace his father on the throne of Israel. But something more heartfelt and more carnal may have characterized the love of David and Jonathan, even if the Bible dares not speak its name. So it's Jonathan Kirsch in his book, King David. The next quote is from Joyce Baldwin in Tyndale Old Testament commentaries. Jonathan's friendship with David brackets Saul's repeated attempts ranging, this one's from Eugene Peterson, ranging from the irrational to rational to kill David. The front bracket to the story begins with these words: the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. 1 Samuel 18, 1 and 3. The bulk of chapters 18 through 20 are then filled with details of Saul's 6 attempts at murdering David. 3 times he tried to kill him with his javelin. Twice he lured him into almost certain death with the Philistines by offering his daughters, first Merab and then Michal, as prizes. And once he sent in a death squad as Jonathan enables David's escape. There's this end bracket. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever." 1 Samuel 20. So 18 and 20 both have this mention of the intimacy between the two of them. the friendship bracketed and contained the evil. So those 6 attempts on David's life between 18 and 20 are bracketed by the friendship. So Peterson says friendship is a much underestimated aspect of spirituality. It's every bit as significant as prayer and fasting. It's highly unlikely that David could have persisted in serving Saul without the friendship of Jonathan. And then Joyce Baldwin. Jonathan's action in stripping off his royal insignia and his royal armor and weapons, only to give them all to David, was more than spontaneous generosity to meet the need of his newfound friend. It was a recognition of David's worth, for which Jonathan was willing to give his all, even his right to the throne, for he loved him as himself. In our political world, where power plays such an important role, what would be thought of a prince who voluntarily renounced his throne in favor of a friend whose character and godly faith he admired? So some questions here. Why don't we hear of or experience more male relationships that might be characterized the way David and Jonathan's relationship is?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just gonna say, I don't think that generally men have that type of relationship very frequently. I mean, I can only think of one person that I've been that close to as a man. And it's just not, you know, I don't know, I'd probably say we're not built that way, but.
Yeah. Mike, I'm just thinking about the workplace and I think of mentors and mentorship, and I think that's continually happening. And I think, I think wise mentors understand that there is a time when they pass over to their mentee, whatever it is they were mentoring them for. So I think there's a fair amount of that.
So you think you see some of that in the workplace?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it belongs in a workplace for one, but I certainly believe it does occur. I mean, it happened to me. And I listen, personally, I hope I could share the same.
Well, certainly in most churches, they don't talk about it. And most of those churches are led by men. And there's something about that makes me think that they're afraid of what it might open up.
Okay.
They have to wonder if there's not some homophobia in it. There's a fear that if two guys are really connected to each other and express their love and friendship, that they would be misunderstood.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're getting past that to some degree, but I think maybe the younger generation is getting past that.
Yeah.
I did a storytelling with Eddie and Darien years ago, and Eddie did Cindy Ellie, and I just inexplicably said, I was the MC, I said, and that man's going home with me.
Oh, right.
And the police just, wow. And then I sat down and I went, wow. But
I went home with him anyway.
yeah, that's right. But I was proud of how Eddie had done and so excited that I just got up there and unconsciously said, and he's going home with me. And I was like, what? That was our David and Jonathan moment.
Short-lived.
Yeah, sure.
I think it seems a little more special because of the roles that David is about to take and the role that Jonathan's giving up. Kind of like Art's talking about this mentorship. That's, this sense of, I believe in you, and I love you because of the way I believe in you. And, it seems like it's more than just a friendship.
But imagine the dynamic that's set up between Jonathan and his dad, right? Like he's in essence rejecting his dad, his lineage,
Yeah.
and handing it off to a person that's not even a member of his family.
Mhm.
Right.
There's a peculiar little story, 2 chapters earlier, 2 or 3 chapters earlier. Where some battle. Saul makes people take a vow that they will not eat anything before the sun goes down.
Mhm.
Jonathan doesn't hear that,
Mhm.
and he takes a dab of honey,
Mhm.
and afterwards. I forget the story exactly, but it's discovered that somebody broke what was considered a sacred vow, and then it was discovered that it was Jonathan. And the sentence that Saul had said was death,
Mhm.
and Saul was ready to go ahead and do it. Yeah, and it's the other warriors at that time said, really? You know, but I mean, you know, Saul's been crazy for quite a while. Maybe Jonathan needed a really good friend.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, and not everybody, the son of, a powerful person feels up to that task or wants that task,
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
been times like the prince of the Austrian-Hungary committed suicide. It's Rudolph or whatever. Because he just didn't feel like he was up to the task. He knew the world was changing and everything, and he just didn't feel up to the task.
Yeah.
And, there've been other people that abdicated or passed over or something because you just recognize that that's not you.
Mhm. Yeah.
You don't have to belittle yourself. You just recognize that.
Yeah, so it could be 2 things going on. One is his own sense of who he is, not really fitting this path, and the other being recognizing who David is and that David really is king material.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You.
Yeah, that's right. Can you point to contemporary examples of someone doing politically what Jonathan did for David? And maybe not necessarily just in the world of politics, but
Well, I think the way in 2016, when Biden, who was the sitting vice president, stepped aside for Hillary, essentially, it's not the same thing, but it was remarkable, actually. I mean, not a great deal was made of that, but he did do that. I mean, it's the closest I could come to thinking of.
Yeah.
Of this.
I think of Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand.
Yeah.
Who stepped down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she said, I just don't have it anymore and I don't need the power. And what if there were some men leaders like that, we might be a better off country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, Nancy Pelosi did that, right? She stepped down as Speaker of the House.
And Diana Feinstein seemed to forgot to.
Yeah.
Against it. What role has friendship played in your own spiritual formation, your own journey with God?
Well, I'm afraid to say.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. I mean, because we're on this journey together, not just by ourselves.
Anybody specific coming to your mind?
All the people on this screen.
I'll take the bite. I could have left in 92 and I decided not to. I came here because of Dale and Debbie. And I stayed not only for Dale and Debbie, but for the church that was really feeding me at the time. So I would be a completely different person if I had not stayed.
Mm.
Hmm.
Well, kind of using the mentorship lens, I think of Joanne. When we came here, she kind of followed her path and learned about good hospitality and parenting and grandparenting and Sylvia as well. I mean, these are women that have been great examples in my life.
Mhm,
I appreciate that.
mhm.
And I think the care that you feel when you're, in the church, people just care about you and support you. And, maybe it doesn't have all of the markings of a very close friendship because we don't see each other as much as certain people we've known for years and years. Maybe there are some people in this group who've known each other for years and years, but it's because people care and they pray and there's just nothing as important. It just builds relationships.
Mhm. Yeah, you
People-
certainly hope to foster a culture in a church where that produces at least some reflection of this kind of relationship. And if it's not, I mean, it seems like something's amiss there.
Building on Julie's comment, I mean, in our church, we sort of go through thick and thin together, right? Every dog has their day, Julie's got her turn with a terrible disease. I've had my turn. All of us have had these things, and then we've walked through that journey together. And I often think about, even in the middle of the night, I can look around our church sanctuary and I see all these people. Some I know better than others, but I know something about every one of them, their personal story. And they trusted us to know that story about them.
Yeah.
To some extent, because we know those stories, we care about people.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, and I hate to use Ted Lasso again, but there's a relationship that says, what are we in now? Season 3? And across all 3 seasons, there's been this the coach, the head coach, the assistant coach, and the business guy, I forgot his name, and they call themselves the dog. Dog pound or something like that. But anytime any one of them has something, deeper or more intimate that they need help with, they say, okay, we're calling a meeting of the I forgot what it is, the dog pound, and they all bark, and then they really share deeply and try to help each other through that. And it's interesting that's this relationship between guys is portrayed in a pretty popular series. Okay, David and the people. So this is from Jonathan Kirsch's book. The words and phrases used in verse 6 to describe the women singing and dancing are used earlier in the Bible to describe how the prophetess Miriam and the women of Israel celebrated the victory of the Israelites over the army of Pharaoh at the Red Sea. Perhaps the parallels between the 2 passages should be understood as evidence that circle dances and call and response songs were the traditional way of celebrating the victory in ancient Israel. Or more intriguingly, Miriam's song and dance may have been written into the Bible by the biblical authors, yet another foreshadowing of David. But the 2 victory celebrations are very different in one telling detail. The song that Miriam sang praised God alone for the victory, even to the exclusion of Moses. But the song that the women of Israel sang after the victory over Goliath praised only flesh and blood warriors and did not mention God at all. So interesting contrast there. But how would you explain David's popularity among the people? And what are they seeing in David?
Must have been charismatic.
Well, he's fairly young. We don't, I don't. That first person said like just moments before, which I think that this has been some time between killing Goliath and this next scene. But still, he's not an old man by any means, so he's young and he's been defined as attractive.
Mhm,
So,
Mhm.
yeah, a young, attractive young man, yeah,
mhm.
Right.
that's gonna make him popular.
Who
And
sings
successful.
well.
Who sings well,
Yes.
musical, yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
and a warrior.
and a warrior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you want?
Right,
That's
right.
right.
He was,
Singing to death.
he was actually a very pleasant fellow.
He's like the high school star quarterback
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, like a high school quarterback.
in Texas, in Texas.
And sing. It also sings in the musical.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
Um,
done some remarkable things, right? He's, he's killed this foe and, basically because he can't see how God will not provide him with that victory. So he's admirable, I mean, I think that's one reason why people love him.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. How do you feel like this popularity may have affected David? I mean, we're guessing, we don't really get a window into that here, but what impact might this have had on David?
Well, it could have gone to his head, especially if he's already had this experience with Samuel coming and anointing him as the apparent next king. And which makes the later stories of him withholding. When he has Saul in his grasp, he refuses to seize the kingship. So at this point in time, he still seems to be in pretty good control of his ego, but it could have gone to his head for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but he's had such a good example of a bad king up close and personal, so I think it kind of helped to hold him in check,
Mhm.
Yeah. I don't want to be like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't want to be like that.
Mhm.
That's the wrong way to go. You don't want to be like that.
Well, given that Saul was the very first king that this group of people had, but I would imagine he had a sense of kings from other countries. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine what his sense of
Mhm.
what a good king would be, or
Mhm.
what a king should be, or
Yeah, that's really interesting.
don't
Yeah.
know what he was drawing upon.
Right, yeah.
But it had to have been a heady experience.
Yeah,
I mean, I think Dale's right. But I think when he's there and he could have killed Saul, I'm just thinking, he's thinking, I could do it right now, and boy, that would be good. Now he pulls back from that, but I don't want to deify him. He's very human. And I think he did check his ego in that instance. And then later on, his ego got the best of it.
right.
Mhm, mhm.
But in the meantime, he stepped up a lot into some pretty tough situations, right?
Mhm.
So he must have had a sense of duty
Mhm.
And I
on top of what
Right.
Julie said, faith that he was going to be brought through these challenges.
What were you gonna say, Mike?
Yeah, I'm sorry, John, I didn't mean to step on top while you're talking, but
So
I've always thought of the time that he spent as a shepherd in his early life as, I guess I felt like he came out of that more in a sense of peace and also dependency on God that, and I think that, that tends to help. I think,
Yes.
we think of, the benefit of like meditation in today's world, and you just figure that that's where his head was for a large part of his early years,
Mhm.
kind of by force. I mean, because that's where he was, and
Mhm.
I think that I've always viewed him as kind of a humble, kind of soft spirited type of person because of that, even though he outwardly expressed himself a lot. Anyway, I've always thought of him that way.
Yeah, the potential of a rich and deep interior life, centered, grounded, not caught up in the competition between his brothers because he's so far down the line that's not even possible. And all of which could prepare him to handle this kind of thing in a healthier way.
Chris,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think of some people that I've known in my life, powerful, rich people.
Hmm.
And sometimes, I mean, I can think of this one person who was a fine person, fine man, but nobody ever wanted to say no to anything he said. Any idea he had, to be like, yeah. And so I wouldn't want to be that person because it's really hard. You start to believe, I mean, even like I said, this person was a fine person, a godly man, but he wasn't treated like the rest of us.
Hmm. Yeah.
Nobody ever thought he had a bad idea.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue to this third question there. What examples of popular opinion can you point to today that are positive and healthy, or that are negative and toxic?
Well, a great deal is made about the approval ratings of this president and the one before him. And their approval ratings were both really low.
Hmm.
And the thought I had is, in our time, what would it take to have an approval rating? What would a president have to do to get an approval rating over 40%?
Hmm.
As politicized and crazy as we are right now?
Yeah.
What would they do? I mean, there'd have to be a war, and they'd have to be winning.
Hmm. Hmm.
Beyond that, you're not going to get an approval rating over 40% because everyone's just tearing everybody down.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and popular opinion is kind of like the women in their songs. It can turn quickly, it can be really high and everybody's up and everybody's good. And something else happens and it's all bad, everybody's piling on it. It's fluctuates quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it may or may not be based on facts.
Right, right. Maybe based on a very small amount of facts blown up real big.
Right.
Yes.
It always amazed me even in the story of Jesus, like on Sunday, Palm Sunday, he is,
Yeah.
the crowds are loving
1
him.
week.
Yeah.
And by Friday night,
Yeah.
by Friday night, he's gone. By Friday morning, they're calling for his crucifixion.
Mm.
Same, and I guess things have been some of the same people.
Yeah.
were in the
Maybe
press.
same people, yeah. I always like to think they're not.
Yeah.
I actually looked up one time, tried to figure out how many people can be in the streets of Jerusalem back in the day. It's not a whole lot, really.
Mhm.
And if they're all crowded with people there for the Passover,
Yeah.
then, could be different people.
Yeah.
Because I was really,
Justified me.
yeah, I was really bothered by it. But all that takes is the people who came out on Palm Sunday to just stay home.
Mhm.
Mm. That's that preach right there.
Yeah.
Write that down. Okay, let's look at David and Saul then. So curse again. Abruptly, the fairy tale glow, the biblical life story of David is extinguished, and something much darker asserts itself. Saul eyed David from that day forward. The Bible reports, verse 9. And the two men entered into a long and deadly chess match that would leave only one of them alive. Eugene Peterson, David was doing everything right when Saul tried to kill him. He had killed the Philistine giant, ending the impasse with Israel's enemy, and he had brought healing to Saul's tortured spirit, quieting the turbulence in the troubled king. He seems to have done both kinds of work modestly and unassumingly, without showing off. For these good works, he nearly got himself killed. It's always disorienting to be attacked when we're doing something good, doing our very best, and then suddenly and violently posed. Beth Moore. The Hebrew word for the kind of anger Saul experienced is informative. Kara, I think that's how it's pronounced. To burn, be kindled, glow with anger, be incensed, grow indignant, to be zealous, to act zealously. Unlike some of its synonyms, kara points to the fire or heart of the anger just after it has been ignited. Kara captures the moment a person explodes with anger. The moment anger is ignited before any sense of control takes over, before a rational thought can be processed. So do you have any empathy for Saul here? Why or why not?
Well, Saul helps me to understand the right wings, extreme right wings tendency to see themselves as victims. They're the ones doing the nastiness, but they also promote themselves or speak of themselves as the one who's persecuted. So in that sense, Paul helps me to understand them. I don't like them, but I understand them a little bit.
Also, Saul is trying to hold on to power, right? He's the
Yeah.
first king. And he doesn't want to let go of that. And here's this young man who's making him look weak.
Mhm.
And the people are even praising him. The women love him. He's such a mighty warrior and everything. You've got to wonder, does Saul think that he's going to lose his position to David? I mean, before he's ready to.
Saul knows he's gonna lose his position.
Why do you say that, Kathy?
I think Saul knows because Saul knows he's having these experiences of, I don't want to say full-blown madness, but experiences of mental breaks and irrational behavior, even earlier, troubled headaches, everything. He knows things aren't going the way they were earlier in his life. He's changing whatever it is, and so, and what's interesting is that, there's other kings, even like what, Nebuchadnezzar or whatever, that have periods of madness, and George III. I mean, there's that can happen. You're put in a position of great power and great responsibility. And then for whatever reason, you realize you're slowly losing it. You're losing the power to do this job well. You're losing that. You're coming unglued at times. And I reckon, in fact, I circled this because this isn't a word. Well, this isn't a word we use. This is a word we sort of need, of this kind of anger that happens where it's before rational thought can be processed. I like that definition because I do see that at various times where it explodes from someone that you thought otherwise, and then all of a sudden they just exploded, and you have no idea how you got from here to there. It just happened, and you on the outside looking in, I don't know, but it does happen.
Yeah. And if we think of that, anger seems to always be a sign of something else. So this intense explosion of anger, what's underlying that with Saul? I mean, is it self-hatred? Is it fear? Is it anxiety about, because we're told, I think he knows that God has sent the Spirit on him. I wonder about all the emotions going through Saul at this point.
He's the one who stayed in his tent when Goliath's down in the valley. We looked at that last week.
Yeah.
And,
He did.
and so he's got to be pretty down on himself by now. And when you're down on yourself, you become down on everybody else.
Yeah.
I do have empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too.
And I think that's, in keeping with the theme, people are complicated. I think maybe it's good for us to stretch ourselves to find some empathy for Saul, because he's sort of cast here as the villain in this story, in the narrative. And so, but maybe he's more complicated than we think.
No, he's tragic.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
To me, it's tragic. And it's also, I can picture it somewhere in this narrative of Israel wanted a king, Israel clamored for a king, and God was saying, you don't know what you're asking for, but I'm gonna give you kings. And this is the way it goes with kings, you know, and so it starts off well, and it doesn't end well for various reasons. And even David's gonna start off even better. And even this perfect guy is going to, you know, make it down and as Israel is going to go that way too, because Israel wanted to a king like the neighbors had a king. It was like, you don't know. And there's a lot of it. Anyway, that's, I see it in the background of this big thing, like, you know.
Yeah, you remember the two big arcs that we saw at the beginning, the first week with the rise and fall of Saul. And so Saul's really coming down, but David's now rising. But then he's gonna go down as well.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, if you think,
Go ahead, Mike.
well, you think about what Julie had said about the gentleman who, you know, people wouldn't say no to. I mean, Saul's lived his life in a way that because of his power and because of his position, people have treated him differently than they would treat other people. And I think when somebody like David comes along and starts to take some of that glamour away from what Saul's feeling, people start to see Saul, you know, they start to treat him more like a human than the king he was. And I think that's from just the position of power. That's, I think you use some of the words, there's fear, there's, you know, there's, I think it's probably primarily fear, but it's all of a sudden you're descending, and that's very, very difficult, I think, on a male ego.
Yeah. Losing control. Yeah. That's good insight. Maybe last question. What role has jealousy played in your own life? Let's see, this is an easy one to answer.
Yeah.
Doesn't require any transparency at all.
Chris, I can think more of envy than jealousy, meaning having a bad feeling about something good happening to someone else.
Okay.
You know, just various times when you're thinking, oh, this person doesn't deserve that, or, you know, maybe things that you've competed for and lost and just had a bad feeling about something good happening to someone. So I can relate to that more. I mean, even, you know, even though I know it's wrong, so I'm working on it.
I think that counts.
Yeah.
We'll count that.
And I would add to that, I think jealousy limits a person, because I think if you're jealous, you think less of yourself. And so you should avoid jealousy.
Yes.
Again.
Yeah. I don't, you know, it's probably played. I'll admit it's probably played a bigger part it certainly played a bigger part in my life than I wish it did. You know, there's a lot of times I'm like, you know, I mean, I know it's wrong. I'm like, Julie, I know it's wrong right from the beginning, you know, but you wish you could just turn it off, turn it down, shut it off, whatever. And it's somehow not that easy sometimes. Really, it's not that.
Yes.
Or it keeps coming back. You think you got it, and then it comes back a year later or 2 years later or something.
But I think you have to be a remarkably fortunate person if it doesn't play a big part, unless you're really focused on God. And I think that's where some of these questions are headed. That if the self-doubt and insecurity is going to make me jealous, if that's the whole equation.
Yeah.
Something else has to be in the equation. And I would say that's God. And I mean, I prayed for a number of years now. I've prayed that I will love people with no wanting whatsoever. And that has really helped me.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, not a set of expectations. That your approach to other people will only be loving attentiveness and not wanting anything from them one way or the other necessarily. And I'm not perfect at that, but I've broken the cycle that I was in before of my self-doubt, and now of course, I'm gonna act in jealous or envious, because I think envy is, maybe a bigger, a more prevalent issue. But anyway, I think that, that's where God has to be in the equation, where of course you're gonna feel, just my ego, I'm gonna feel jealous about something, or envious, or you're resentful. All of those, if God's not in the equation, I'm gonna feel them.
Yeah,
Well,
I love that prayer.
and I mean, for me, it's recognizing my own, it's accepting my own limitations like this. And, that you just don't have as many options in certain areas or whatever. So, yes, God needs to play a big part in this, but anyway.
Yeah. James, I saw your hand.
I remember when I first came out of college, I had a security guard job, wasn't making much, and boy, was I envious or jealous, whatever word you want to, of my brother and sister. And even someone from the church who left, and here I am, was struggling, working in delivering papers 3 o'clock in the morning, and had to leave New York because I had to be in bed at a certain time, and and boy, I can't tell you how much I get in these arguments with God, and serious arguments, whether swear words or not. He knew what I was thinking, and geez, who am I now? Where am I now? Surpassed them, surpassed a lot of people. My buddy who worked at the post office, he'd be coming home with big checks, and I look at him and I was like, shake my head, and I say, out of jealousy or envious or whatever you call it. But sure enough, things started to click. And I guess, for all my anger to God, things happened. That happened. Before you know it, I was hooked up with lawn doctor, and then I got involved with the post office, and then I one thing after another. And my cup runneth over.
Married a good woman.
You have too much.
Fountain.
It's sure helpful to be able to have that longer story to be able to look at.
Yeah.
Because way back here, all you knew was that part right there, but now you can see, okay, there was no need to be jealous, because God was going to take care of me and provide for me and open these doors and opportunities for me.
That's right.
And
Deep in my heart.
Yeah.
You're right. My cup runs over, and now I could give, and I'm basically on top of the world. There's so much on top of the world is that when I give, to the family here, I get embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. I don't know why, I feel like people looking at me, I don't know, from the wrong point of view, but that's how I feel, I just want to crawl underneath a rock. And I shouldn't feel that way, because I'm giving it out of a good purpose.
right.
But that's how I feel,
I'm not amazed.
Yeah.
Thank you, James, very much. Okay, our time is up. I'll draw your attention to the end of the handout. There's some Lectio Divina questions by Stephen Bintz that you might benefit from reflecting on during the week as you continue to sit with this text. So thanks, everybody, for being with us tonight, participating.
Drinks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks,
Good night.
everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Art was gonna say something, Julie turned it off.
Um,
Bye, Robert.
I